on this episode of In the Rack podcast.
Public speaking skills and the way that they can affect how you connect with clients and patients, the influence that you can have with clients and patients in those settings, that the skills that were attached to public speaking as being things that really just have carryover in so many areas, not just professionally, but also personally.
What you got? Welcome to In the Rack podcast, where we provide you with a practical framework for breaking PRs in all facets of health and wellness. We are just a couple of bros giving you the simple hows in a world of complex wants. No filters, no scripts, no rules, just straight talk. Talk to 'em. Now, let's get into the rack with your hosts, Dr. Chad and Dr. Nick.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of In the Rack podcast. I'm your host, Chad, and with me is my co-host, Nick, and my co-host, Hayden. Hayden is now a co-host.
Wow.
He's a co-host.
I feel official being on the other side of the table right now.
It only took him, a year and a half to get on the podcast to be a co-host, but he's here.
He passed his test. His test was to run a marathon. He did it, and he now gets to co-host.
Exactly. So that was the test. He passed.
He's a little bit distance on the table.
He
though.
is.
I can't block out.
He can't block the camera.
The major host.
You know, we've got some pretty faces over here.
Yep.
You can't block these faces. But anyways, we have a special guest here today. His name is Nick Lambe, and we've been trying to have this guy on the podcast for a little while. Actually, he was up in the area, so we were like, "Hey, man, why don't you come on by? We'd love to just, spit off some stuff with you." And he's just got so much information. And we met Nick about 4 years ago now. It was actually during COVID. And Nick Lambe he's been in the health and fitness industry for years. He's a coach himself. And he first started his sleep coach program. And he's known as, or was known, I'm sure you still are known as the online sleep coach.
In certain circles.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And in our original circle, he was the online sleep coach. And that's how we met him. And that was Nick and I's introduction to Nick Lambe. And that was the way that we kind of started connecting with him. So we took his online sleep course. And then after that, he then started a conference or a summit for coaches called the Raise the Bar event, which was amazing. We did that three years ago now, I think. 3 years. Yeah, because this will be the fourth year.
The first one was 2022.
2022.
Yep.
Yep. So that, and we'll dive into that a little bit too. But first, Nick, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about yourself for those that are listening that might not be aware of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I've been in the health and fitness industry now for going on 12 plus years. I've worked in a lot of different settings. I've taken, I would say, probably a bit of a non-traditional path for most personal trainers, most strength coaches. So I started off working in big box gyms, spent a lot of time there, getting a lot of experience in that setting. Originally, my plan was to go to physical therapy school. I had gone through the whole entire application process, got accepted to a few schools, was basically right at that point. And so because of that, I was working as a coach in a physical therapy office like this, very collaborative type of setting, which was great. My wife was going through physical therapy school at the time. She was just finishing up. Wasn't my wife at the time, my now wife, and just saw the amount of work and that she was putting in and where she was at in the process. And it was one of those things, if I wasn't 110% into from a time and financial perspective, I wasn't really there. And so decided to just pivot and stay in the fitness industry for a bit, which obviously has been great. And for me, at the heart of everything I've tried to do and at the heart of what has mattered to me the most has been education. And so for the last 7 years or so, my focus has been primarily, while still coaching, my focus has primarily been providing education to the industry, providing education to other coaches, and in a variety of different ways, hosting of events, hosting of courses. Like you mentioned, I come from a background of in the clinic I was working at, I spent a lot of time with sleep. I became known in that space as the sleep guy. We started providing sleep coaching as a separate service, which was, especially at the time, a bit of a unique type of thing. And so develop a system around sleep that I then parlayed into a course, which you guys took the first iteration of, helping coaches and practitioners of all types be able to practically work with sleep. Sleep was, I always looked at it as this thing of, it's in the triad of health with exercise and nutrition. Unanimously, people know that it's important. They know it affects results in fitness. They know it affects results in rehabilitation. But when it came down to what you practically do with somebody who might be struggling, there just wasn't a whole lot there, or at least I felt there wasn't a whole lot there. And so the goal was create some of these more practical options, practical systems that coaches and practitioners can help more people who are struggling. And God knows there are plenty of people who are struggling. And that really led to an opportunity to educate even more in the industry. And so I've been fortunate now at this point to have spoken at well over 100 events, both inside and outside of the fitness industry. And also, so another void in the industry, which is based around public speaking skills, and the way that they can affect how you connect with clients and patients, the influence that you can have with clients and patients in those settings. And a lot of times when people think of public speaking, they just think of the stage. They think of the big stage and the big events, and that's great. You can do a lot of things by being on stage. You can develop a lot more to your brand and business by being on stage. But I also looked at the skills that were attached to public speaking as being things that really just have carryover in so many areas, not just professionally, but also personally. And so my focus now over the last few years has shifted a bit to public speaking education through a variety of workshops, and we run a virtual mentorship, and it's really empowering coaches and a multitude of other people as well to more effectively public speak, more effectively be able to use these skills. And what I always say is have them show up where it matters the most in your life.
I think that's great. And I totally agree. I think the public speaking is huge, and there is a ton of carryover there, especially in the model that we have, and in the model that we have, because we don't take insurance, we have to not only be very confident in ourselves, but we also have to understand the value that we're delivering to these patients, right? Like if we don't know how to convey value to our patients, then it's going to be a really, really tough sell. And I do believe that there is carryover between the ability to public speak and those skills to being able to carry over into what you do for work, and those skills that are required to make a sale. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, like, yes, we are physical therapists, we provide a service, but we're in the business of sales, and that's just what it is.
In the business of sales and in the business of customer service.
Correct.
And in the people business. And when you're in the people business, you're only as good as you're able to communicate. You could take, and I talk about this all the time in our space, you could be a 10 out of 10 tactical coach or a 10 out of 10 tactical physical therapist, where you know tactically exactly what needs to be done and in every way, shape, or form. But if you're a 3 out of 10 in terms of your ability to communicate that to patients and to where they feel relatable, to where they feel connected to you, to where they have confidence in you, their perception of you is a 3 out of 10. Absolutely. It's not a 10 out of 10. It's not based on the merit of how much you know, how much information you have. It's how well you're able to communicate that information. And I think that's it's almost one of those things that's very obvious, but it's also a big gap that exists. And this big gap that exists in speaking and communication is your perception of your ability to communicate and influence and other people's reception of how you speak and communicate. Just because you think you're saying things in a certain way or you're explaining things in a certain way does not mean that that's how it's actually landing and being received by other people. And a lot of times we aren't always willing to take that look in the mirror of, is there a big gap that exists there?
Yeah, and I think the biggest mistake that a lot of, PTs in our industry make when they come out, it's like they're talking to a patient, right? They almost feel like they're talking to a colleague or another PT, and they have to justify how smart they are. And it's like you just nailed it, man. Like patients don't really care how smart you are. They will understand how smart you are by how much they understand when they leave. You know what I mean? And the fact that, we know, how many PTs do we know that are great clinicians, but can't sell a package, right? Or, can't convey how important their value is to the patient. It's crazy how many people that we have that just can't dumb it. For lack of better words, dumb it down for patients to understand what's actually going on, how long it's going to take, and what the process looks like for you, versus somebody who's just like, well, you've got X, Y, and Z, and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And people are like, yeah, I don't even understand what you just said.
And the irony of that, too, is very often when you have a clinician or a coach who's not getting results and they're not able to connect with clients and patients, the the natural progression or way that they typically will think is to go and consume more information. I need to learn another system. I need to learn and acquire. I need to add more things to my coaching or therapy toolbox. When in reality, what you're doing now is you are adding more things that you're not able to relate to other people. You're just adding more things. I always say there's 3 layers to really effectively getting across things to other people. There's what you know, and you have to obviously have a base level of knowledge. You could be the most dynamic public speaker and say things so fluid and be able to tell stories, and your body language is strong, but if there's no substance there, people will see obviously through that. You have to have that level of understanding and knowledge. I'm not to say that isn't important, but there's what you know. That next layer, a lot of people won't get even here, but that next layer is what can you actually take of what you know and communicate to other people. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it as dumbing it down or filtering what's important, or the old, can you explain it to a 3rd grader? And if you're not able to, in some way, shape, or form, you might not have as good of an understanding of it as you might think. And a lot of people, again, won't get to that second tier, that second layer. I think there's a 3rd layer that gets even more underappreciated and that even more people don't reach in our space. And that is what actually lands and sticks with other people. And I use this word a lot, sticks. It makes, what is sticky? And information alone is not sticky. That is a big revelation for people in our space. And not just, this isn't just health and fitness industry. This is across the board, but information is not sticky. Information alone is not going to drive people to take action. If it did, we'd all be out of jobs. If people they have all the information out there that they need, but they come to coaches and they come to places like this to have it packaged differently for them and delivered in a way that they can understand and that actually sticks with them. And so it's being able to reach that final layer of what actually lands and sticks with them, which in turn will drive them to actually take action, to actually do something different, to make a significant change. People want to think that they're logical beings. We're emotional beings. Even people who are not inherently very emotional by nature, we are emotional beings. We use logic to justify which emotions we're feeling or why we might be feeling those emotions, but ultimately we make decisions based on emotion. And if you fail to reach people emotionally, I'm not saying you need to have kumbaya with your clients and patients and be able to talk therapy of their personal relationships and that type of emotional connection, but you have to reach them on some emotional level with the things that you teach them, with the things that you coach them on, the things that you share with them, because otherwise you're stuck in shallow communication with them versus deep communication. And when you're in shallow communication with someone, you have no influence. They don't trust you. They don't feel as though they're going to do the things that you say. But when you're in deep communication with someone, there's a different level of trust and rapport that exists where they're going to be much more likely to do the things that you're asking of them. Right? And this is kind of, I always joke, this is the evolution of any coach. And I know this is the case in the rehabilitative space as well. You start off, and in those first couple of years, when you have these clients who aren't following through on anything, there's no follow through whatsoever. And you just, man, this person, they don't do anything I asked. And another person, they don't do anything I'm asking them to do. I don't know what's wrong with people. But then you take a look in the mirror, or hopefully you take a look in the mirror, you get to a certain point where you realize, okay, this might be on me. This is my job. This is what people are coming to me and paying me for. I might need to change some things here and be able to reach people differently and actually get them to change, because that's what I'm supposed to do.
That's 1,000% right. This is actually a great segue. I want to segue into, we started with you with the sleep coach program, and then we went into Raise the Bar event. Now, Raise the Bar event for us was something that was a little bit different for us. And that was kind of when we were making this transition away from insurance. So you were kind of like right there during that transition for us. And that was when we were like, man, I feel like we need to do something different. The model that we have is just not going to survive. We need to explore outside the industry, and I think that was the main reason why we did that. And we had other conversations with other strength coaches, like Matt Ibrahim was a great, advisor for us and mentor for us. And he helped us along the way. but I feel like we needed a little bit more. We needed like some more kind of guidance. And when you kind of had this Raise the Bar event come out, I was like, man, this could be it. This could be something that we need to do, right? Because reaching outside the industry not only allows us to make more contacts, but it also allows us to see things a little bit differently and apply it to the model that we currently have, which we've done like 1,000 times over. And our model has changed so many times that you wouldn't even think this is a physical therapy model. This is probably more of a strength and conditioning model versus the physical therapy model. However, that model that we have now, or that model that is in the strength and conditioning industry, definitely jives more with the model that we have. And because we don't take insurance, they've figured it out. All we have to do is ask them, because the PT industry hasn't figured that out yet, and to go to other industries has been, I think, not only a huge movement forward for us, but it's made our business grow like 1,000,000 times over. And how many clinicians, like you pointed it out, Nick, like how many clinicians will sit there and be like, I think I just need to become a better clinician. I just need to work on my hard skills, right? And they forget all about the soft skills, like your customer service, you're the model that you're implementing to create this environment, right? To create culture within your environment. And I think a lot of that stuff the PT industry misses, but the strength conditioning facility captures that, And I think that was a big part of what we got at Raise the Bar, is to see how other people are doing these things and how we can implement these soft skills. Like you were talking about public speaking, other abilities to be able to reach people, become relatable, and all this other stuff, because that really is what makes a difference between what you do over at ABC physical therapy and XYZ physical therapy. Do you know what I mean? That is what makes the difference. And it's not, hey, they're just better clinicians over here. That may be true, but these people might not be better clinicians, but guess what? Their compliance is better, and therefore their patient outcomes are better. Do you know what I mean? So I really truly believe that if you have all the hard skills but don't have the soft skills to complement the hard skills, then you're just going to keep on going like this forever, And I think that was, and we talk about this all the time, like we're big advocates for reaching outside the industry, and we always advocate for other PTs to get outside of your industry and to talk to, strength coaches and talk to, athletic trainers and all of these other psychiatrists, like all these other people in different industries that can help you become a better clinician overall.
100%, especially when you feel or that that a lot of the issues exist within your industry, right? It's one of those other ironies of, okay, this industry that I'm in is not quite getting this right, and that's okay. No one industry has everything perfectly well dialed in. And you're looking at it, okay, this industry that I'm in doesn't really have this part dialed in very well. But then I'm going to go and do more networking, connection, education in that same space when, like you said, you're going to get so much more from these other perspectives. And I would say, we obviously with Raise the Bar, we bring in, it's primarily health and fitness oriented types of practitioners. So we've got coaches there and athletic trainers and physical therapists all in the same room. I would even encourage you to go beyond that. Go beyond the health and fitness industry. Look at, especially from a customer service perspective or a communication perspective, that the world's best customer service is not happening in the health and fitness industry. And again, that's okay. But there are industries that, for example, in hospitality, high-end hospitality, look at what the Four Seasons does from a customer service perspective. That is true customer service. Right. And again, that's not what the health and fitness industry's focus is, but being able to take those things from other industries. But again, that comes back to what can you actually employ into your model. And that comes back to, of course, your ability to communicate effectively and your understanding of the bigger picture.
And just like any other industry, people are just seeking solutions, right? Like we always kind of forget that in especially in rehab, like people are looking for solutions. We're looking for how can we fix this person? And a lot of times the solution is going to be the verbal educational route, like in rehab. Whereas in strength and conditioning, you got to do the work, work has to be done. So something physical has to be done. But in rehab, a lot of times just the education and awareness piece is enough. And that's conveyed through communication, but people are just seeking solutions. And that is what you can extrapolate like from every other industry. It's just like you think plumbing, electric, like people are looking for the solution to their problem at hand, right? And that's what we're talking about. With
I have a
the
pain point.
communication
I have
piece.
a problem. I have something I'm struggling with, and I'm coming to you to number one, help me solve this, solve this in an efficient way. To do it. I mean, people pay. You talk about what is sales. People pay for speed. They pay for efficiency and speed. They pay for you to take them from A to B a hell of a lot faster than they would get there on their own.
Absolutely. And I would even say, like, so Nick, when he ran his Raise the Bar event, that was like, he popped our cherry for like coaching summits or coaching conferences, right? And you never know where those are going to lead, right? You don't know what context you're going to make. And I met a very great person there named Allie Gilbert. She became my coach for years. And then now I'm working with Ryan, which is one of her coaches. Shout out to Ryan. He's the man. And in that process, not only has Allie become my coach, but she's become a personal friend and now a professional colleague. So I've gone to multiple events with her, being not only a guest of hers, but also have been introduced to other people in other industries like you were talking about. Like, for example, we just went to Bedros Live event, which was, huge entrepreneurial, mindset, growth, and it's like, that's another piece altogether, right? And all of that stuff does play a role. But again, like, you don't know where that stuff can lead. And it's just like, it's a domino effect. And when you don't take risks like that and you don't take the jump to actually, meet people and network stuff with people like that, then you don't have the opportunity to know where it can actually lead to, right? So
100%. If you're a coach or a PT, or I would say really, and this spans across any industry really, and you're not going to in-person events in some capacity, you are missing out
1,000%
on a significant chunk of what allows people to be successful. And that it's so much of, you look at people who are more successful and you look at who they know, and look at that didn't happen by accident. These connections, this network, I'm sure people have heard your network is your net worth. Those things don't happen by accident. They happen by being in the room. And this is, again, one of those other areas of where I think public speaking skills really come into play. So many people have what I call contextual confidence. If I'm in front of the right person in the right scenario, I can feel confident, I can feel effective. But public speaking skills are things that you take with you everywhere. So when you go to an event, I always encourage this for coaches. I mean, be generous with your energy. There's a difference between being in the room and being in the room, being a presence in the room, and how you're initiating conversations with other people, and how you make them feel, and how you're able to connect with them in a very different way. And that's where you do that. And as a result, like you said, you establish these type of really life-changing, career-changing connections that you make.
Absolutely. I mean, and I really do believe that this needs to be part of the curriculum, when you're in college.
100%. Sure.
I mean, you didn't get any. You were the one that graduated the soonest. Did you get anything like that?
Yeah, we didn't have any type
The
of
soonest, you say it like you did in an accelerated time. Like the
Okay, that's
soonest.
not what I meant. That's not. And we all know it took
the
me
only
the
one here
longest
that did it
because
accelerated was me. Okay.
But yeah, we didn't have it. I mean, we got up in front of a class of 40 people who we spent all of our time with, and that's when we gave our presentations. But we didn't have. It's comfortable. We didn't go out.
Yeah, of course.
And have a public speaking course or anything like that.
And even those situations are just kind of a reactive approach, right? Okay, and there's so much of, if you look at the statistics around public speaking, you'll see a variety. But recently, over the last few years, it's been the number one fear in the United States, and I know it's the case in other areas of the world, like above death, above fear of heights.
Whoa.
There's an old
I can see that.
There's
That's
an
so
old,
crazy.
albeit dark joke that if that's the case, that if you're attending a funeral, you're better served being in the casket than having to give the eulogy.
That's
Which is nuts, obviously.
That is crazy.
But people have so much of an anxiety and fear that they've built around public speaking. And a lot of that stems from it not being a part of what they're exposed to early on, being able to express yourself and communicate and share ideas differently and getting gradual exposure to that. And when you don't get that, and then you just get an instance like this where you're thrown up in front of the room having to give a slide deck to your fellow students, of course you're going to feel really crappy about that. Of course you're going to have a lot of stress and anxiety around that situation. And because you had no preparation for it, no skills attached to how you do it and do it well, you're not going to feel that it went well. And now you're going to feel even worse about public speaking. So now you're going to go out into your professional and personal life, and you might be in a situation like this. And Chad and Nick say, hey, I want you to go out and lead a presentation for this group here in the community. And I'm not saying that you would struggle in that situation. I'm sure you do perfectly fine, but you wouldn't feel as well equipped to do it given all those things that didn't happen, and that's this snowball of stress and anxiety that's built around that.
This goes back to last week. Last podcast we did was about doing hard things. We were talking about Hayden's marathon training, Chad's bodybuilding training, and like just the value of doing hard things in life. And if there's that much anxiety around public speaking, like do it more, because then it's going to serve as a hard thing, and you're going to extrapolate so many benefits from that, physiologically, emotionally, physically, everything.
Yeah,
100%.
or just get used to just doing hard things.
Well, yeah,
like
exactly.
challenging yourself, like
For sure.
like doing uncomfortable things.
Well, I heard this actually very recently, and I would do this in different settings for working with people in a public speaking context. But one of the best ways to improve your public speaking confidence and to reduce some of the anxiety that exists around public speaking, there's a lot of things, and we can unpack more of those things. But one of the things is, do we curse on this podcast?
Absolutely.
Is to give a fuck less, right? So much of what people experience around public speaking anxiety is the fear of judgment by other people, being vulnerable, being judged in that by other people, caring a lot about what other people might think. And there's a whole layer to that of people are in their own situation and they actually don't care as much about what you're saying as you think. So you can reduce the pressure there. But another is gradually exposing yourself to embarrassment. Yeah. And that can fit into doing the hard things. But when you gradually build yourself into more embarrassing situations, you desensitize yourself a little bit to what might exist with public speaking. Over time, you care less about what other people think. And when you get to that point, then you're in front of an audience, even if you play out the worst case scenario, which is another piece of worst case scenario, you get on stage, let's say it's even in front of a massive group. I mean, let's say Chad had a presentation and he gets on stage and it's in front of 200 people and he bombs. It goes awful. He can't remember any of the things that he was supposed to say and nothing really landed or connected with the audience. It bombed. It just didn't go well. Chad's still going to get on a plane, come back home. He still has a beautiful business here that he needs to operate. He still has a wife and 3 daughters. He still has a life. He still has all these things and people that count on him, all these other things that he can do, and he's going to get another opportunity. So when you play out the worst case scenario of something and realize it's actually not as bad as you think and as bad as you make it up in your own head, and you actually sit with the feelings and you sit with that situation a little bit, that can also make a lot of the anxiety that you feel a little bit easier. But this idea of gradually exposing yourself to embarrassment, you can start really small with this, but it's being out in public and asking a stranger for a hug, asking a stranger for a high five, being in a restaurant and literally just walking up to a table and taking their order as if you were a waiter, or singing in a subway car, or just you get creative. You could pick things, but again, it's doing the hard things, but it's building this armor in a sense. It's building this caring less about what other people really, really think. And that's a really great base to operate off of. I know a lot of public speakers that will actually do this in the context of a big presentation. So there's one in particular, someone I was listening to recently, he had a keynote talk that he was giving in New York City. And a few hours before his talk, he went on a New York City subway, in one of the subway cars, had a little boombox and sung an entire song to a fully packed subway car. And by the time he got to his keynote talk and on stage, there was so much of that feeling being desensitized where he was just much more prepared and much more confident I'm not saying you need to do
do it to that extent
or jump to that right away. It's a gradual thing, just like anything else, but there is a lot of value in doing that.
So Allie, if you're listening, Chad's ready for his silverback presentation. He's ready to go.
I've never had a problem being on stage and talking. I've honestly never had a problem. And this is funny. Like probably 7 or 8 years ago, whenever I'd go to conferences, I'd usually just like kind of mind my own business, prep brain, sorry, mind my own business. And, never took advantage of those times where I could meet all these people, right? And I think in the last like 4 to 5 years, I've become more of an extrovert. I think I'm an introvert by nature, but I think I'm more of just an introvert with like, I just like to communicate with people that I feel connected to. You know what I mean? If I'm in a room full of people that I could really, I'm pretty much an introvert. But if I'm at a coaching conference and I've got a lot of relatability there, then I have no problem walking up to somebody and being like, hey, how's it going? Or, just like starting conversation or carrying on conversation. And I think a lot of people have that problem where it's like, they miss so many opportunities because they don't take advantage of the situations they're being, presented with, and I think that was one of the big things that helped me kind of going forward. And that's, I truly believe that's one of the reasons why I've created so many of the connections I have. It was because I became more comfortable with a situation like that, was able to meet more people and have better conversation. But if I didn't have that, I don't know where I'd be. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean?
And a lot of that really is, again, public speaking skills, communication skills that give you more confidence to show up in those situations. Again, so many people have just contextual confidence, but a lot of that is also just intention. It's setting an intention if you're going to an event or if you're in a social setting. I know some of the most introverted people who, firstly, are great public speakers. They're incredibly introverted, but they intentionally can turn on that energy and enthusiasm when they need it. And they can do the same thing in those type of settings. Now, they might go back to their hotel room and be completely silent for a day and recharge and replenish, and that's perfectly fine. But it is an intention when you are in a setting like that to be more generous with your energy. And that, in communication, that is one of the most underappreciated but valuable things that you can do, is just be more generous with your energy. Just be more generous with the energy that you give to other people. Let a little bit more expressiveness come out. Be a little bit more generous, because people can sense that and they want to reciprocate that. This idea of somebody having a presence when they're in the room. Obviously, there's a physical presence, but there's also a communication presence. There's a vocal presence. There's a body language presence. There's this presence that someone has. And a lot of that just comes from being a little bit more expressive or a little bit more energetic or a little more enthusiastic. And when people can feel that, they want to give you more energy too. They can feel it, they can sense it, they want to reciprocate. And when you're both emitting actual energy and enthusiasm, that's where you develop real connections. That's where better conversations come out, as opposed to, too often people going through the motions of not being very generous with their energy and just giving very generic responses to questions. I always say for coaches, for example, if you're going to an event, you're going to be asked, hey, wait, what's your name? Chad. Oh, what do you do? Or where are you from? And there's just like this autopilot response of, oh, I own a physical therapy clinic and I treat patients.
Right.
Okay,
cool.
That's cool, man. Really, that's great.
Yeah.
And part of that is just the delivery of the way you say it. Again, that's that intention of energy. But there's also strategies for example, one thing, it's called leaving conversation threads. Leave more threads for people to latch onto. So if people ask me, where are you from? And I just say, oh, I live in Southwest Florida. If they've never been to Southwest Florida or anywhere in Florida or don't know anything about Southwest Florida, where exactly are we supposed to take the conversation from there? But if I answer with something as an example, like, I live in Southwest Florida. I grew up and used to live in New York, and my wife and I moved down with our daughters to Florida about 5 years ago, just a change in quality of life. Well, okay, now we can talk about New York to Florida. We can talk about New York. We can talk about family. We can talk about kids. We have a lot more. You're giving more things for the other person to latch onto, more threads for them to actually latch onto. And that's just intention. I'm not saying you need to prepare all the things that you're going to say for an event or prepare your responses, but for things like that you're inevitably going to get asked, at least give yourself a little bit more going into the situation. And I also think this is where another one of the areas where public speaking allows you to better show up in these situations, because the best public speakers, people who really understand public speaking and value public speaking, also understand the level of preparation when it comes to communication. They are so incredibly well rehearsed with their content. They understand it so much. They've spent so much time with it. And again, when you have that mentality, you're taking that into something like this where you prepare for events. You prepare for how you're going to communicate. And again, you don't have to script everything, but put a level of intent and preparation to how you're actually going to show up.
I love it. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's huge. I mean, like the whole preparation piece, just it makes so much sense. You're treating it almost like athletics or something like that, where you see that in a lot of industries, like financial industry. You see a lot of former athletes go and do well. It's like, why are they doing so well? Is it because they're financially savvy? No, it's because they treat it like a sport, right? They treat it like they did their sport, which they got to the highest level, and now their level of preparation is just higher than the person next to them. So then they achieve these higher levels than most.
100%. And with public speaking, I always say, and it sounds a bit cliche, but I always feel I'm one talk away. And I always approach it as though I'm one talk away. So I give that level of preparation and intention to any talk that I have to give, as if it could be the talk that changes everything and opens doors that I never thought was possible. And really, that is what public speaking can provide. Even on the smaller stages, there is no level of attraction and influence that you can match compared to what is generated by being on stage charismatically and dynamically. Being on stage and doing it well, there's no level of attraction and influence that you can match hosting a podcast. No offense. No. Hosting a podcast, hosting a course, being in another setting, one-on-one setting, writing a blog, anything else. There's nothing that can match that if you do it and you do it exceptionally well. But so many times people don't treat it that way. And I love the industry that we're in. I'll be honest, the vast majority of our industry is just not very good speakers. And part of that is just that it's not a part of their focus. They're doing other things and they maybe haven't quite grasped and taken in the skills and that preparation. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a coach or even someone outside of our industry and they say, I really can't do well with public speaking. I freeze up. I have to give these talks regularly at my job or in the clinic I work, and they just never go well. And one of the follow-up questions to that is often, well, let's talk a little bit about the preparation. How did you prepare for this talk? How did you prepare for this opportunity? And we all know, you see people still do it at events, right? They have their laptop and they're literally about to get on stage in 5 minutes and they're like changing slides. And I used to do this too, so don't get me wrong. I 1000% used to do this as well. They're changing slides and and when they rehearse, they're up in their hotel room the night before and they're like, just kind of like reading it in their head. How you prepare is how you show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if you're performing like that and rehearsing like that, that's how you're going to show up and deliver it on game day. Like you said, from an athletic perspective, that's what your game day is going to be like. But if you really embrace the full rehearsal process of a talk, you become so much more confident, so much more connected to the content. And I'll often get a pushback on this of, I don't want to be too scripted. I don't want to feel inauthentic or scripted. The irony of that is when you see a speaker on stage and they're able to be very charismatic, you see them interacting with an audience, you see them, for example, speaking of the first Raise the Bar, I picked Chad was my go-to. He had a mohawk.
Oh yeah,
Chad was my.
Chad was every one of them actually.
I think well, you do it for most Raise the Bar. So you got to come back next year. So I have my.
I tell this to Nick, not to cut you off, but I tell this to Nick all the time, and Hayden. Wherever it's not just you, man. It's everywhere I go. It could be the front row. It could be the back row.
I see it all the time.
I am the guy that gets picked on. It doesn't matter. So I am the icebreaker.
Well, you stick out. In a sense.
I'm okay with that. Because
part of it too.
It's easier for me.
Part of it for Raise the Bar. People already know you, right? It makes the connections easier.
Right.
But part of it too, I think, with Raise the Bar was like, I don't know if it was just that you were drinking a lot of water or whatever it was, but you were like the only one who because I was emceeing the event too.
That's
right. You're the only one who I kept noticing, like literally would get up every 5 minutes. And I just had to call her up, be like, Chad, where you going? Dude, what are you doing, man? Where are you going? You literally just went to the bathroom 5 minutes ago. So I think
that's why I think he's going to do well in the show. I've been telling that to patients. I've been like, he's going to do well because every time I've been with him in any kind of setting like that, he just gets called out. So people notice him. So he's got a little aura around him too.
There definitely is. There's a presence. There's a presence. It's not just a physical presence. It's another charismatic type of presence. You can definitely feel that when somebody walks into the room. But part of why I was giving that as an example is that when you see speakers able to be in the moment and have that be present, so not having the presence, but being present in the moment and interacting with the crowd or being more humorous, or just you see them being there in real time, they're only able to do that when they are incredibly prepared. So people will think, well, I don't want to be incredibly prepared because I want to be authentic. But if you're not prepared, what's the only thing you're thinking about and focusing on in real time? What you're saying next, because you don't have a grasp of it. You're just thinking about, okay, I got to say this, that, and then, okay, next point. And you have zero bandwidth and space left to actually connect with people. So I call this the 80-20 rule of how I typically approach talks or workshops or anything that I'm doing is I owe it to the audience who has often paid. If they haven't paid in money, they've paid in their time to be there. So I owe it to them to have 80% of what I have put together be incredibly well rehearsed and put together to where I know it, to where I always challenge people who go through our speaker academy and programs. I want you to be in the place where the AV tech comes up to you at an event and tells you our whole system blew out. We have no slides. We have no audio. We have nothing. It's just going to be you up there in front of the room. I want people to still be comfortable and confident to feel that they can offer some value to the audience in that setting. So that's that 80%. And you leave 20% to actually connect with the audience, to where it's not every single word and everything that's being said is scripted. And we could talk about rehearsal too. There's a way when people think about being scripted, it's in this very like robotic, overly professional delivery, and they just rehearse that script. A lot of the intention with what we focus on in public speaking is how you deliver, how you use your voice, how you use your body language, different props you can use, ways you can make it more engaging. And those are the things that you're rehearsing. So they're things that drive more engagement with people. Because I think this is a big gap in public speaking as well, is really giving the intention to entertain and engage people. I always say the best public speakers have an incredibly powerful and compelling message that they have real conviction in. Like they truly believe in it, and you can tell that they believe in it in their delivery. And if they feel confident that if they got that message out there, it could change the world or some pocket of the world in some way. They have that conviction, but their intention with how they deliver that talk is operating from an assumption that nobody cares what you have to say. That the best public speakers have the message and that they're so confident in it, but their preparation and their delivery is operating from a place that no one in the audience gives a shit what you have to say. And that kind of sounds in a certain way like a negative when you think of it as, well, why should I even bother if nobody really cares? But it forces you to make what you're saying more engaging. Make it more entertaining. And this is especially true in our industry. You guys know now, you've been to more events, you see it. There's so much emphasis on the information. People use this, I call it content shield. They just so much information and they rely so much on the information. They pour as much information into the talk as they can, but they are not able to keep people's attention. You're not engaging people. It's hard to keep people's attention. People can't watch and aren't willing to stick to watching a 30-second video on Instagram as they scroll. Just because people think that just because an audience is sitting in front of you, you have their attention. Right. Maybe they paid, even if they paid to be there, even if it's multi-track event and they decided to go to your talk, it doesn't mean you automatically get their attention. You have to keep their attention. You have to keep them engaged. You have to keep them entertained in some way, shape, or form with how you tell stories, with being more dynamic with your voice, your body language, different ways that you deliver. And the best public speakers can balance the substance with entertainment. Because of course, if it's all performative and you just got props and you're inspiring people and it's all this stuff with no substance, people walk away from the talk and they feel, whew, wow, I feel fired up. I feel great. I have no idea what that talk was about or what I'm going to do differently, but I feel great for now. Versus the other side of having too much substance without any of the entertainment or engagement, people are just, again, remember going back to the beginning, information doesn't drive real action. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. And you could challenge yourself thinking of presentations that you've sat through, or going back to, okay, if you go back to other Raise the Bars or other events, and how many talks really stick out, or how many talks can you really remember? And that's the difference. That's that gap that exists. And especially in the health and fitness industry, I always say, for aspiring students in the workshops I host or in the speaker academy, you've got a really, really great opportunity in our space if you embrace it. Because again, as much as I love the space, there's so many great people that are not great public speakers. And I get it. It's just not what they do. It's not what they focus on. They get invited and they get the opportunity to speak at events because they're great coaches, they're great business owners, they're great at what they do in the tactical pieces. That doesn't automatically translate to being good on stage and being effective on stage. And so if you're in the health and fitness space and you want to public speak more and you want to be on stage, if you embrace the skills and you embrace being a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more of these other pieces, you're going to differentiate yourself massively.
I was just thinking about the first Raise the Bar. What you got me thinking when you were talking about the speech, that the Mike Robertson one stuck out when he just, like, we were talking to Luca at the time.
Ric Flair
and he Ric Flared it. And everyone was like,
awesome.
what was it? It was great. And it's just like, boom, something like that just sticks out.
Everybody was like,
whoa.
It's 100% it. Because think about it. When you're able to create memorable moments. So again, a big piece of that, and we could talk storytelling. Like, storytelling is a massive part of this because people remember stories, they connect to them. But the best talks are experiences that create moments. They give you these moments. Because I always liken it to, if you're trying to make a point, let's say it's something you really want people to take away. You could just say it or give some information or anecdotes attached to it. You could tell a story that people are going to remember. You can attach a bit or something else to it. For example, I have something I do regularly at events. It's like a little bit of a bit that I modified from my good friend Martin Rooney, who's an incredible speaker. One of the best.
I've heard him many
one
times.
Of the best.
He's a fantastic
one of the
speaker.
best. He was at the Raise the Bar that you guys were at in Dallas.
I've seen
the
him
second
perform
year.
better a few times.
Yeah, he's unbelievable. He's the great balance of there being a simple, clear, concise message, but the entertainment piece. So it's something adopted from him. He's unbelievable. One of the best.
He's a showman for sure.
He's a true professional speaker,
No doubt.
which is not something, again, you see a lot of in the health and fitness industry.
doubt.
But the level of preparation he puts in, you can tell it's performative. It's not performative in an inauthentic way, but it's performative in the level of preparation and the level of attention to detail. So a modified shtick, so to speak, from that, where I'm talking to people about how public speaking skills are exactly that. They're skills. They're things that are very readily available for everybody. And if you look at really anything you want to have results in and be successful in, it's a combination of ability plus strategy. What is a God-given ability that you have, right? Versus plus the strategies that you actually employ, the skills that you actually develop in order to get the results in those areas. And ability matters, and there's certain lack of ability. No matter how much attention I give to strategy, skills, detail, development, anything else, I don't have a base level of ability to be a professional athlete. So I'm not going to get that result. But with public speaking, people view so much of it as their ability. Well, I just wasn't born a good speaker. No one was born a good speaker and communicator. Martin Rooney was not just born that way. Yes, there was certain things maybe that came a bit more natural, or sure, those things happen, but it was the skills. Now, I could just say that, and I could use my voice dynamically, and I could just say that in a way that maybe people remember or that's engaging. But a way to make that same exact point is if I have a leather belt and I bring someone on stage. I usually try to pick someone like Chad, like the biggest person, one of the biggest in the room. I'm like, it's a full bonded, double bonded leather belt. I'm like, Chad, rip the belt in half. And if you just try on the surface to rip the belt, even you're not ripping it in half. But I will then have that person get off stage, and there's a strategy to do it. There's a way you turn the belt around and over a certain point, and you get the crowd engaged. They're clapping, they're excited, and you rip the belt in half. And could Chad have, obviously Chad's stronger and bigger than I am. Did he have the ability to tear the belt? Of course he did. He was lacking the strategy. And so again, Could I just say or talk about this ability and strategy equaling results? Sure. But if you have something that creates a moment attached to it, people are much more likely to go back and remember it. It's going to stick with them. For example, Mike Robertson's woo, that was 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
You still remember
it. Yeah.
Which means you probably also remember more of the things that Mike Robertson taught you in that talk.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's good.
Yeah, no, that strategy. Martin Rooney had a lot of those strategies. So,
dude.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's unbelievable.
He's really
if
good.
you have not had a chance to listen to Martin Rooney, I would definitely listen to that guy.
Yeah.
And he has a great story, but he doesn't really go into the backstory much. Like he talks about a lot about, what he's currently doing, not what he did. He uses that as a segue, but not as much as you think he would. Like he doesn't play into it as much, and like you don't know how successful that guy was.
He's done a lot of things,
shit.
yeah, and he doesn't, and that's part of it's not. He's not using that as the main substance.
He doesn't.
Of the talk. And to keep on Martin, because I think there's so many things he does so well in this space, is there and also the best public speakers, and this surprises some people, the best public speakers, their message, like their core signature message, signature idea, it's not complicated. It's not convoluted. There's not all these crazy layers to it. They have a simple, clear, but impactful message. So if you look at, for example, at the core of a lot of Martin's talks, I'm very much simplifying and drilling this down here, but it's to genuinely care more for the people that you work with, to show up more authentically for them, to have more energy and enthusiasm for the people that you work with, to be on fire for them so they can be on fire for themselves. And that's at the core is simple. But if you just said that, no one would ever do anything. But the way in which he delivers that, which is an experience over the course of 45, 60 minutes or more, is you feel the components of that. You feel the energy and enthusiasm. You feel what's possible. And it creates an experience for you. And experiences that make you feel will actually drive you to go back home and be like, oh, you know what? I am going to be more energetic and enthusiastic with the people I care about. So the best public speakers like Martin are able to have a core message that is really simple and clear, but impactful. Simplicity is distilled power. Just because something is simple does not mean it's not impactful or valuable. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite.
Yeah, and that's another additional value to going to these types of events is that you see such a variety of how people convey messages, and a lot of the messages, like at an event like Raise the Bar, a lot of them are like a lot of the same stuff is being talked about. It's just in a different way, so provides it through a different lens, and then now it's like, oh well, that type of lens works better for the way my brain works. This works better for someone else and all that kind of stuff. And then same thing, you interact with the people there. And aside from just like, oh yeah, Chad owns a business, learning that, you start talking to them about, what they do, how they do it, how they convey the messages that and then you learn how to, you might have a patient or a client in front of you and it's like the way you normally describe something, it just ain't working. So you're like, oh, I met this guy Chad one time. He talked about it this way. All right, let me try that. And you go, so now you just increase that toolbox a little bit in terms of, the public speaking side.
I think the first thing Chad asked me when I was brought on to the Proform team was that, are you comfortable projecting a message? Because he's like, this is where we, at the end of the day, we are making a sale. And are you comfortable making that sale? And I think for me, being exposed to things like Perform Better and being in the strength and conditioning world and outside of physical therapy really helped me thrive in this environment, because I was like, yeah, no, I'm comfortable with that. And I feel like I can portray a message more effectively than some of my peers who were in physical therapy school, just because I've been exposed to it before. So I think one of my major messages to even though I'm not quite a new grad anymore, but to new grads would be expose yourself to other things, like we've been talking about this whole entire podcast, because it goes such a long way for you professionally, but also for the care you can provide to your patients.
Yeah, and what I would say too, that's a great starting point for anyone, whether you're new and green in the space or you've been doing it for a while and you want to really lean into more of these skills. Is it's the old, if you look at all the phases of truly learning something and being able to do it, the first step is that unconscious incompetence and being able to step into conscious incompetence, knowing what you don't know. Okay? There's you don't know what you don't know, but learn the things that you don't know. And within public speaking, everyone has, and I still have them, of course, and we all do, everybody has these default strategies or these tendencies of things that they do that make their message and their communication less clear. I always say that the analogy for this is that imagine you have your favorite drink. Nick, what's your favorite drink?
Like alcoholic drink?
It could be alcoholic or just drink in general. Something that
tequila soda.
Okay, so
Alcoholic
tequila
drink.
soda has a flavor, right? There's a reason why you like that as your favorite drink. There's a flavor to where it's a good tequila. There's a good mix of the tequila and soda. It's a flavor that's attached to that drink that makes you like it. That flavor is the potency of your message, the effectiveness of your message. And all these areas of speaking and communication, if you don't do them well or you do them really poorly, they're ice cubes in that glass. What happens when you have ice cubes in the glass and they sit around for too long? They melt, they dilute the message. So I get, all the time I get asked, what about this with your voice? What about filler words and non-words? They're ice cubes in the glass. Some ice cubes are bigger, for sure, but they're all ice cubes in the glass that can dilute the effectiveness of that message and make it less potent and in turn make it less effective. People enjoy it less. So I call this the speaking mirror, and it's giving yourself a speaking mirror of give yourself a starting point of these speaking skills and understand where you're operating from. Record yourself speaking on something that interests you or something you think you want to talk about more. Record yourself speaking for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, somewhere in that range. Record it. And after doing that, you're going to place a few mirrors on that recording. You're going to do an auditory mirror where, let's say you record it on your phone, you just flip the phone around, you just listen to your voice. What does your voice alone communicate? Do you sound more monotone? Is the pace really quick? Is the pace really slow? Is it all the same pace? Is volume at a point where you're always feeling like, I kind of have to lean in? Ask other people as well. What does my voice communicate? What does my voice alone convey? I mean, your voice is it's really your most underappreciated communication tool. The next is you're going to do a visual mirror. So you flip your phone back around or you watch the recording now on mute, just observing your body language. What does that communicate? What are the strategies that you're looking at there? What is your posture when you're speaking? What are your hands doing? What do your hand gestures represent? Your facial expressions. People very often have a disconnect between their facial expressions and what they're actually saying, where it doesn't match up. They're telling a sad story, but they're smiling. And people use smiling as a default, right? Sometimes. But you want to understand those things. And you want to know what those things are. And then finally, you do a verbal mirror to where you're looking at the quality of the words that you're using. So you actually have it transcribed. And most of the transcriptions will give you the opportunity to remove those filler words and non-words. Don't remove those. And take note of them because, unfortunately, filler words are some pretty big ice cubes in the glass. If I'm trying to make a really powerful point to you, and I'm saying, speaking skills are really important, and they're valuable, and they can help. Obviously, that's an exaggerated example, but it takes away from the clarity of the message. So when you have these three different mirrors here, you can get a bigger picture. I say this as you're trying to find the hypothetical spinach in your teeth. The things that other people see when they're speaking to you or they experience when they're speaking to you that you don't see for yourself. And until you place the mirror there, you might not actually see those things. But it's these layers of the best speakers and communicators have the things that they say being supported really well by the way in which they're saying it with their voice, being even further supported really well by what their body language and their facial expressions and what people can see. And having these three things work together is the most clear, effective, impactful communication. But you'll often see people have something not matched up. For example, they're telling you something that's supposed to be really inspiring, but their vocal form and their voice is not very inspiring, or their body language is not very inspiring. But if I'm strong body language and I add a lot more layers to my voice and I increase my volume and I push the boundaries of my voice and I'm saying something inspiring, now I'm really creating something that's that much more effective.
That's interesting.
I like that, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, there's so many great tips in this. I don't want you to give it all away because I do want people to take your course. But one last thing I'd like to kind of just hone in on, and this might be informational for the people listening, but what would be your recommendation for people that might want to start to become a better speaker? Like, where do they start? And then you have like those people that are like, yeah, man, I've got it. I feel pretty good about it. Where do those people go next into being able to maybe take it to the next level? And how do they go about doing that in terms of like getting these like speaking gigs, if you will?
For sure. So for the very new, or having never public spoke or never really leaned into that space, but wanting to more, a few starting points, one of which I mentioned is that speaking mirror. Give yourself more self-awareness, because when you can identify a few things, I always say everyone has a few dominoes, and you're always trying to find your dominoes initially. What I mean by that is everybody has a few of these things, a few of these strategies around public speaking that are very simple. They're not easy to do, but when you do them, they create a cascading effect into how you speak. A lot of times for people, that's more volume in their voice, because volume adds more life to your voice. It adds more vitality to your voice. And even if you do everything else really well with your voice, if you don't have enough volume, it just doesn't line up. It doesn't have the same effect. And a lot of times when people add more volume to their voice, it adds more melody to their voice. It adds more expressiveness. It adds more layers to their voice. It makes them more influential. Sometimes for people, for example, myself, one of my bad default strategies that I would have is, like a lot of people, I never knew what to do with my hands. So I would always keep my hands in my pockets. Guys keep our hands in our pockets, women sometimes on their hips. There's this very closed off way of using our hands. And, yeah, exactly.
What do I do with my hands?
What do I do with my hands?
I don't know what to do with my hands.
But when you do that, firstly, people can process what they see quicker than they can process what they hear.
For sure.
So when they see what your body language is communicating, your hands are in your pockets as you're on stage, it doesn't convey a lot of confidence, authority. It seems kind of closed off. You're also missing out on one of these other ways to add layers to what you're saying of, again, if I'm talking about growth and I'm making that demonstration with my hands, makes it more clear. People remember it more. So for me, I had this really bad tendency to keep my hands in my pocket, and it pains me to go back and see this. Like, I used to do it with one hand, just one hand in pocket, and it just stayed there the whole talk. But in addition to having removed the hand and all the things that we just talked about, it was a domino for me, because when I realized that I let my hands go a little bit more, and sure that they're not always perfect, the gestures, they don't always exactly line up with the things that I'm saying. But when I let them go, when people can do too much with their hands too, it becomes very distracting. And we see this, right? Yeah. People are expressive with their hands. But I found that when I let them go a little bit more, it changes everything in my voice and in my delivery. Like if I sit on my hands right now I have the awareness, and obviously I focus on this, so I can push my voice, but it's a lot harder. Whereas when you learn the interaction of look, feel, and sound, that how much that interplays, that is such a great foundation to have. When you realize that your body language affects your voice affects your body language, and also those things tie into how you feel. And this goes back to like changing your thoughts to help change your feelings and your actions. But too often people might say, I don't feel very confident. And you can't just really tell yourself to feel more confident. Hey, be more confident on stage. Just be more confident.
Just do better.
Better. I'm going to feel more confident. Okay. But you can hack that a bit by looking more confident. So if you're more strong with your body language and with your hand gestures, and by sounding more confident in your voice, they actually start to trickle into how you feel. You actually start to feel more confident. So when you start to understand that interplay that exists between look, feel, and sound, really valuable, really great starting point. So doing these speaking mirrors, figuring out what those dominoes might be for you. So if you identify a few things in that in those mirrors, pick one thing at a time, record the mirror again, and focus just on that thing. So again, if it's volume, okay, I'm going to do this speaking mirror again, and I'm just going to set the intention to increase my volume, to push the boundaries more of my volume and see what that creates. Because this kind of leads into the second part to your question of, for those that feel that they have a good grasp, or they feel, yeah, I got it. Okay, how do I get the opportunities, or how do I put myself out there? And I know that's the piece we didn't really talk a lot about, is how do you find those speaking opportunities? And a big piece goes back to the relationships and the network that you have and how you put together your ideas and all those things. But I always say that there's 3 layers. There's getting booked, which in actuality, if you have the right network and you're persistent enough and you go through applications and excuse me, you do these things, it's actually not all that difficult to get some of those initial opportunities. But the second stage is staying booked. Because outside of somebody who's just famous, if you look at why they get booked, outside of somebody who's just famous and incredibly well known, you're not going to get future opportunities unless you're good at speaking, unless you're really good. And I know that seems obvious, but it's getting better at speaking to where one opportunity turns into multiple opportunities. The other thing I'll say with that I think a lot of people miss the boat on as they're starting to speak, trying to speak, especially in our industry. So for example, Chad, how long have you been in the industry?
15 years.
15 years. Okay. So if I said, Chad, I want you to put together a talk. We've got this big event that we're hosting, 200 clinicians. You could speak to a lot of things. You could pick a lot of topics, I imagine. There's a lot of things that you have knowledge in, experience in, that you know well. The problem with that is that it leads a lot of aspiring speakers to jump topics way too much. And what happens with that is that it doesn't allow you to really focus and hone in on one thing, to have that signature message, that signature idea that becomes really referable, and put in the time necessary to do that. It doesn't allow you to become well known for that one particular thing. And having that one core idea, that one signature message, it doesn't mean you're going to be stuck and pigeonholed in that forever. I think you look at, again, my sleep situation is a great example of that. Sleep was that key focus, practical sleep systems for coaches. And that allowed me to get all these speaking opportunities that now have parlayed into teaching public speaking skills. But it's getting more of those opportunities by being known for that one thing. And it got to the point, and honestly, it still is at this point, where if you ask me to give the core sleep talk that I have, I could do that talk in my sleep. But that's because of the amount of time I was able to spend with it. And people look at that sometimes as a bad thing. That's not. That's a great thing, because when people, if you look at where event hosts seek out speakers, I heard this called, I forget where it was, FEE, F-E-E. It's an acronym. Fame, entertainment, and expertise. It's Michael Port. Michael Port does some development in public speaking. Really, really great resource. Fame is obvious, right? Fame is just the notoriety, and people will get booked to speak. A-lister athletes will get booked to speak. People will get booked to speak solely on the basis of their fame. And these are all sliding scales. So you go from, there's a sliding scale from no one in the world knows who you are to everyone in the world pretty much knows who you are. Then you have expertise. Expertise, and this is the one that people really try to lean into. Well, I'm an expert in this. The problem is everybody's an expert. If you've been doing something for a while, you're a subject matter expert. I've been doing this 15 years. I've worked with this many clients. I've studied this topic. I know it really well. But that's just subject matter expertise is on one end of the scale. Visionary leadership is on the other side of it. How do you take the things that people already talk about, already know, have already heard, and deliver it in your own unique way that kind of challenges people to think differently? It pushes against the status quo. And then you have entertainment. We talked about this earlier. Entertainment's a big piece of it's a sliding scale from novice presenter to transformational performer, where they're just dynamic and charismatic, and they're Martin Rooney. They create an experience. They make people feel from the stage. And all these things are sliding scales. And you can move yourself further along each of these sliding scales to make yourself more attractive for event hosts. And the fame is obviously the hard one, but keep in mind that there is very specific domains of fame too. For example, I mean, who would be the people that we would say in the health and fitness industry that are famous? Who would be some people maybe that would jump out?
John Berardi.
Okay, John Berardi. I mean, you go to a corporate setting or business setting or somewhere else, it's likely nobody knows who John Berardi is. But somebody who's been in the health and fitness industry for any period of time likely knows who John Berardi is. So there's different pockets to fame as well. You can become very well known in a given space. You can also become very well known and very famous for a particular thing within a particular space, but only if you have that signature talk and that signature idea. And keep in mind, with that signature talk and idea, you don't need to be different in order to make a difference. You don't need to select a topic that no one's ever talked about before. You just have to have your own unique way of delivering it or putting it together. It doesn't need to be, well, I mean, this is a talk on mindset or a piece of mindset, and well, everybody's talked about it. That's okay. It doesn't have to be. Very few people are creating a topic that has never been talked about before ever at all. But it's just your own unique way of putting it together, and you're only able to do that when you spend a lot of time with it as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you had asked me 5 years ago what I would talk about, it would be different than what I would talk about today.
Yeah.
And I know that you're the same way.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
sure.
And Hayden, you're going to eventually be that way too. Once you've been, kind of doing it longer, and you're going to like, hey, this is what I niched. This is what I niche now. You know what I mean? This is what I was into. This is what I am into now. And like, even 10 years ago, I'd have been like, yeah, man, anything clinical, I'm happy to talk about. I don't want to talk about anything clinical anymore. I'm not as smart as these two, and that's why I hired them. And that's why, and I'll admit it. And I've had this conversation with many professionals where it's like, yeah, I may own the business, but that doesn't mean that I am the smartest in the business.
In every aspect.
In every aspect of the business. And that's why I have to have people that can fill those voids for me.
100%.
But I do feel that I can run a pretty successful business. And I feel like that, not everybody has the ability to do that. So I feel like that's been my niche kind of going forward. And that whole leadership role is something that I love doing now. I also love the clinical side, don't get me wrong. But where I've changed my focus is like, yeah, I've taken about 1 million different classes, and I still will take classes. But it's not a priority for me anymore because it doesn't move the needle as much for me and my business as much as it does for these guys, right? Like, I want these guys to be amazing clinicians, right? I don't want them to have to struggle and worry and stress about the business. That's my job. You know what I mean? Their job is to make sure that patients get good outcomes. Obviously, that's my job too. But, in the grand scheme of things, my priority is making sure that the business runs the way that it needs to run.
100%.
So that we can continue to thrive all together.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think this goes back to with the topics of maybe jumping from a topic in the future. There's a difference, and this sounds kind of corny or cliche, but there's a difference between passion and purpose. And it's okay. A lot of times these get clumped together, but this comes up a lot within public speaking when you're finding that core message. It's got to be rooted in a purpose, and a purpose of what matters to you the most. So the difference really in this context is that your purpose is more staying the same, whereas your passions can be dynamic, because we can be passionate about a lot of things. And like you said, they might change over time. The topics we might focus on, we could be passionate about sports. We could be passionate about food. These things evolve and change. Your purpose should be less dynamic. It's like, this is what I feel my root purpose is. And the passenger, just different ways in which you deliver that. So again, if I take it, I genuinely feel that my purpose is to educate in some capacity and to have that opportunity to teach and educate. And right now it's in the health and fitness industry. It's for other coaches. I'm starting to step a little bit outside of that. It used to be more sleep focused. Now it's more public speaking skills focused, but those are different passions, but it's the same purpose. That purpose stays the same. The passions can be dynamic.
I love that. Yeah. Lots of great information.
And that's interesting too, because I really like what you said about like increasing the volume. Because like when you increase the volume, it doesn't necessarily mean you're passionate or enthusiastic about it, but it does enhance like the purpose of what you're talking about, right? Same thing, like if I am enthusiastic and passionate about something, it will likely increase my volume. That will then likely also increase my, like you said, the strong posture. So there's going to be so many trickle effects with that, which is, that's a good piece of advice
volume.
for sure.
I mean, volume, one of the big ones I always emphasize with volume is volume leads to believability. And if people don't feel that you believe what you're talking about,
for sure.
there's no way that they're going to believe it. And for better or worse, I always talk about this too, because when we get into some of these pieces of, people disengage or they don't perceive you as being authoritative or having confidence, there's almost a sense of where people feel, well, are people really thinking that? There is conscious engagement. There's also subconscious engagement. So conscious engagement is these things that, some of which we've talked about, that can happen that are very clearly taking away from what's being said. I find that, and maybe this is my own bias, but I find that when people use a lot of filler words and non-words, that it's very obvious. I consciously note that, and I just automatically am focused on those filler words and non-words, and I can't really take much away from what they're saying. Or we joked earlier, somebody who's using their hands a lot. And I use my hands a lot, but hopefully not to the point where you see some people, it's like this, and it just becomes, it's like visual clutter, and it's just taking away. So there are things consciously that an audience might be thinking of, I really don't, I just don't connect with that, or don't connect with this person, or they're really monotone, they're really boring, any of those things. But there's a lot that happens underneath the surface as well. Subconscious engagement is all these things that are happening as people are processing and thinking within their subconscious. Is this important for me? Is this relevant for me? Is this something I can utilize? Is this something that makes me feel or elicits an emotion in me? And this is where mastering these skills comes into play with volume, or, for example, rate of speech. If you do not vary your rate of speech, people disengage. Because if the brain is able to predict the pace and rate and cadence of what's coming next, it tunes in less. Think of a podcast episode that you might have listened to 5, 7, 10 times. That 7th time, you're not as engaged because you know what's coming next. You're not anticipating what's coming next. So somebody who doesn't vary their rate of speech, again, people sitting in the audience are disengaging subconsciously. It's not that people are sitting there thinking, Chad's been at about a 6 in terms of his rate and pace of speed now, rate of speech now for about the last 5 minutes. That's it. I'm
done.
Right? They're not making that decision consciously, but it's happening underneath the surface. And volume is a big piece of that, where, again, if there's not enough volume, people don't feel that you believe it. And if that's the case, then good luck. Right?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. So what do you got coming up, Nick? You got a lot of things going on. You got any like events coming up? You got any, courses or anything like that coming up that people should know about?
Yeah, for sure. So we are doing Raise the Bar again. So this will be
looking forward to that.
This will be the 4th year of Raise the Bar.
We might have to take a company trip out there for this one.
We'd obviously
That'd
love to have you guys.
Yeah,
that'll be in Dallas in February. So that's the big event. On the speaking side of things, I run a Speaker Academy. We're in the midst of a cohort right now. It's called Impact Speaker Academy. But the big thing and the big project that we're in the midst of right now, it's called Speakness. And it is basically a model of speaking skills where we're making speaking skills attainable and accessible for everybody. Everyone can attain a certain level of fitness. There are certain qualities, aerobic health, strength, mobility. There are certain qualities that can make someone more fit, which allows them to show up physically in the areas of their life that matter. Having a base level of fitness allows them to do that. And having a base level of speakness, these skills allow you to show up personally and professionally where it matters the most as well. And so really allowing people to get those skills, having them be, whether you want to speak on the big stages or you just want to have better conversations with other people, create deeper connections, just be a little bit more influential, be a better leader, be a better clinician, be a better coach, that's available and accessible for you as well. So really treating speaking skills like you treat fitness, treating them as actual qualities and attributes, and having those foundations is really the the name of the game. We're talking about triathlons, and you can't go run a triathlon if you don't have a base level of fitness. You have to have that base level of fitness first. You can't go and be a keynote speaker or go and be a really incredibly influential leader if you don't have that base level of speakness. So we are launching a community club virtually that I essentially am framing this as, look at it as a gym membership for speaking skills and communication skills, where you can get these skills in a community-based environment. We'll have classes that are based around voice, storytelling,
That's great.
thinking on the spot, and improv. It'll be just a gym type of environment, but for speaking skills, to where you can really put in the reps and continue to put in the reps on a consistent basis. So we are tentatively launching the Speakness Club in December of this year.
Nice.
I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So where can people find more about you and all of these like cool things you got going on?
Yeah.
If they wanna
So
look it up?
albeit I'm not a massively active person on social media, but still a good place to interact. So for sleep related stuff, and still kind of as a hub for content, is at the Online Sleep Coach, THE Online Sleep Coach. For more of the speaking oriented side of things, it's at Impact Education Events. So this is where you'll find more on the speaking side of things, as well as some of the events that I do. I also host a fair amount of virtual events. Raise the Bar, we literally are just rolling out in this coming week. So depending on when this is released and rolled out,
Yes.
last week of October 2024 is when we're putting out Raise the Bar. So you can
Looking
find
forward to
that as well.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. Well,
Nice.
thank you for stopping by, Nick. It was a pleasure, man. Learned so much, and I know people are going to get so much value out of this podcast. We're looking forward to Raise the Bar. I think it's going to be a great one this year, and we look forward to seeing you down there, man.
Absolutely. Thank you guys
For sure.
for hosting me, for having me on the podcast, and for the support over the years. You guys have been
Absolutely.
some OGs and,
Yeah,
and a lot of this stuff. So I definitely appreciate you guys.
No, thank you very
Awesome.
much,
And
Nick.
you too, even though you
Yep.
haven't been an OG, I still appreciate you.
He's part of the OG.
Yes.
by default. Cool. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for joining us in the rack this week. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. You can also find us online at proformptma.com or on social media at proformptma. And remember, if you train inside the rack, you better be thinking outside the rack.